Welcome, everybody. I mean, I know that today is a day of uncertainty. And one thing, right? But one thing I am sure of is that we have a remarkable group of not just filmmakers, but films here in our collective. Um, they inspire change, they enlighten through telling little known stories, and really, truly, they can uplift us all. And in the end, one of our big goals is to get these stories, these films, these materials to you, our educators and our librarians, so that you can also inspire your students. Just a little bit about New Day. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary coming up. And we are run by filmmakers. We're over 100 of us now. And we all play roles. We all have specific roles within the co-op. My job, one of my jobs today, is to moderate today. And my name is Laura Seltzer-Dunai, and my film in the co-op is at New Day Films is Nobody Wants Us. And that is a film about the United States' response to refugees during World War II and what we've learned from that. I'd like to give a heartfelt thank you to two of the co-organizers of the event, Suzanne Barraza and Reagan Brashear. Suzanne, yay. Suzanne, if you want to give a wave, she's our current day chair, and her films in the co-op are Baggett, Uranium Drive-In, and her newest film is called Massacre River, which will be featured in our third showcase series on November 17th. So mark your calendars for that. Reagan, wave, because she's amazing. She is the one who's the brainchild of this idea, this whole program. So, and she's really put a lot into this as well. And her film in the co-op is Fixed, the science/fiction of human enhancement. I'd also like to thank Annie Small, who has really been involved in this as well. And at the end of the program, Annie's going to share a little bit about our special collections, licensing, and other things like that in order to acquire the films at the end. And her films are Vultures of Tibet and Before You Know It. And unfortunately, Karen Knox isn't here today, but she's our manager in our central office. And she has a wealth of knowledge about New Day operations and our films. So you can always reach her via the website, and you can reach all of us filmmakers directly via the website as well. So that's something really special, I think, about New Day Films, is that, because we're member owners, you also can reach out to us directly. So let's get started today. We're gonna show 5 of our newest film releases, and then you're gonna have time to meet the filmmakers behind these films as well. Each is gonna talk a little bit about their film, show a little clip. I'm gonna be the techie who's gonna be your virtual projectionist at that time to show the clip. And then please do think about questions that you have for each filmmaker. And you can either feel free to type them in to the chat, or just raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask verbally. Because this is what's nice about us. We're small. We're it's not a huge group. So I'd love this to be more interactive. We are recording this so that we'll give you a link to this as well as all the film links at the end. And our films are all closed captioned via streaming. And also, because I'll be the projectionist, Suzanne will be facilitating the Q&A. I think that is all. Those are all the technical things. And now let the show begin. All right, so I first want to introduce our first film, which is A Stroke of Chaveta by Pam Sporn. By Pam Sporn. And Pam's a Bronx-based documentary filmmaker. She's an educator and she's an activist. And she loves listening to people's stories about standing up for injustice in their own unique, subtle way, and not so subtle ways. So Pam's two films in the New Day collection are Detroit 48202, Conversations Along a Postal Route, and this film. So for the next 9 minutes, Pam, you have the floor. You want to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm happy to be here. And the name of my film is With a Stroke of the Chaveta, and this is the infamous Chaveta. And Stroke of the Chaveta is this. This is a tool that cigar makers use to both cut the tobacco leaves and help shape the cigars, but it's a form of expression, because in the cigar factories, they use this method of banging their tables with the Chaveta to express approval or disapproval of something that's going on. And how this relates to my film is that it's a story of the people who read to the cigar workers in the cigar factories. So I'd like Laura to roll a little clip.
Tabaqueros. 1, 2, 300 sentados en vapores. Dedos hábiles torcían hojas húmedas de tabaco. Un toque de la chaveta, un poco de pega, otro puro colocado con orgullo en la rueda de tabacos. El lector. Uno solo sentado ahí arriba en la tribuna. Un libro, quizás un periódico en las manos. Ya en muchos lugares no se oye la voz del lector. ¿Acaso prohibida, olvidada o reemplazada por la radio? El caso es que en la Cuba de hoy, la lectura de tabaquería es una tradición que se defiende con amor.
Cuentan que las herramientas Un Buen Día se reunieron en asamblea plenaria con la finalidad de arreglar sus diferencias. El martillo ejerció la presidencia, pero la asamblea le notificó que tenía que renunciar. Ya llevo 15 años y no me aburro.
Dicen que tenía un buen repertorio. Canciones de celos. Celos. Malditos celos. Un bolero puede ser. El nuestro es un trabajo eminentemente intelectual, con una misión: mover el pensamiento para tocar los sentimientos. Un trabajo intelectual proletario.
Nos gusta mucho la novela de García Márquez, a los trabajadores les gusta mucho la novela de García Márquez. Hemos leído casi todos los libros de Hemingway.
Cuando está buena la lectura se le da chaveteo y ya saben que es un signo de aprobación.
Es imposible que nos lo quiten porque es que este trabajo, ya usted ve, uno se mete aquí dentro y empieza a trabajar y trabaja, y si no tiene quien te lea para uno poder escuchar, hace, no sé, sería, no me lo imagino, vaya, sin lector.
Es la tradición. Sin la lectura no hay tabaquería. Es imposible. La lectora es la persona más querida de la tabaquería.
Se te olvidó decirme a mí que tu tabaco se te apagó.
Thank you. So you may wonder, you hearing me? You may wonder how I came upon this story. Why did I decide to make this film? I was researching I was doing research about Cuban immigration to the United States for another film, Cuban Roots, Bronx Stories, and I came upon an oral history called Reminiscence of un Lector, Reminiscence of a Reader, and it was about a reader in Tampa. And he was talking about how the readers in the cigar factories went out on strike in 1931 because the cigar factory owners had taken their reading platforms out of the factories, and the workers went on strike. There was a 10-month-long worker general strike in Tampa, and this fascinated me that people were striking because they were being deprived their right to have someone read to them. And that's such a symbol, or a symbol of the fact that people want education and people want the liberty to know the world. And so when you think about the kinds of things that were being read in the cigar factories, going back to Cuba in the 1860s up through today, in the 1860s, they were talking about, in the 1860s, they were reading early workers' newspapers. They in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, they were reading material promoting the liberation from Spain. So it's just a very inspiring story. I love the story. And I think it's so wonderful for all kinds of disciplines. When you think about it, it's about popular education, it's about literacy, it's about labor history, it's about Latin America and anti-colonial struggles. So kind of thinking of today and films that inspire us to make change, this is really about how the fight for literacy was combined with the fight for workers' rights and an anti-colonial struggle against Spain. So I'll leave it there and you can ask me anything that you'd like.
Well, thank you so much, Pam. What a beautiful film and incredible footage of Cuba, which many of us have never been able to see. So thank you so much for that. Does anyone have any questions before I kick off with a question for Pam? Going once, going twice. Oh, we have a question.
We've got, or Ellen, would you like to say it on camera?
Oh, Pam, I love this topic so much. Because we have great labor films in New Day, and I just feel like builds on this. But I'm wondering, did you see connections with how other factories were run in other countries at all when you were doing some of this research?
I did find some reference to similar kinds of things going on in hat factories, but you have to realize this is a quiet activity. So the work, the actual work that people are doing, it's not, this happens in factories where it's hand rolled. And it was interesting because I went into other factories in Cuba where they're making less highly prized tobacco, and they're done by machine. And so they're rolling out and you hear all this noise, and the workers have headphones on like this. And so it's like you could see the difference in terms of the communication and the kinds of political and social discussions that were going on between the workers.
I think Louise has a question next.
Yeah, I do. I love this notion. I think it's really terrific. Is anyone still reading in Cuba today? Is this still happening?
Yes, absolutely. You know, when I first started the project, I had in mind a real period, a real historical kind of documentary with rich archival material. And then I realized that in Cuba, the reading continues. So up to this day, and almost every single factory that does hand rolling has its reader, and they're in a union, and they you know, they're paid by the state, and which is different from historically the workers contributed money to pay the readers, because they were not hired by the factory owners, they were hired by the workers themselves. So this goes on in Cuba. They have a reading association where they talk about kinds of literature, ways of reading. So it's really fascinating.
And are the readings freely selected, or are they somehow controlled by the government, the party?
This is a fascinating thing that's revealed in the film. They poll, there's a readers committee in each factory, and they poll the workers for what they would like to have read the next time. So they may present them with a list, or they may ask for suggestions from the workers, and then they go from station to station to station, and you know, they get the majority of people's desires, and that's how they choose what's read. So it's a real exercise in a kind of literary democracy.
Thank you. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much, Pam. We're going to go to our next one just in lieu of time to keep in our timetable. Our next film is called Soledad, and it's directed by Lisa Molomot. And Lisa is a Tucson-based filmmaker and film professor. Her films Missing in Brooks County, The Cleaners, Safe Haven, and this film, Soledad, which we'll see a clip and learn more about today, have all focused on immigration and immigrant communities. So Lisa, you have the floor for the next few minutes.
Thanks. So my film, Soledad, is a short 24-minute film about an asylum seeker. And she was forced to leave her home country due to gang violence and torture. It came to the US in order to try to gain asylum, and ultimately ended up at the Eloy Detention Center, which is not that far from Tucson, where I am based. And the story is told through Soledad herself, and also her pro bono lawyers, whose name is Shafali, and a third woman whose name is Rosie, and she is the interpreter in the case. And then there were two other women, a psychologist and a doctor, who also were part of the team. So it's a team of women that tell the story, but also were part of this case. So how I came to this project. So I live in Tucson. I teach at the University of Arizona. And one of the things I teach is a course on film and law. And just hanging around the law school, I found myself actually at the Workers' Rights Clinic one day, just sitting in on a class. And I happened to be there on a day where these three undocumented women came in to share their story about working with the Workers' Rights Clinic and how they brought a case against their employer. They were experiencing wage theft, and they brought the case against their employer, and they won. And I was so impressed with the bravery of these women, not only to stick up for their rights against their employer, but the fact that they knew the law and they knew it really well. And I just was really, really energized by their story. And I decided to make a short film about a case at the Workers' Rights Clinic. And I did that. And when I finished, I sort of started looking around again, like what else is going on here at the law school? There's, you know, I had recently moved to Tucson, and this was a whole new world for me. And so I met Shafali, who is the pro bono lawyer on Shafali's case. And we talked for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I knew after that I wanted to work with Shafali, because I thought she was amazing. But also she told me the story of Soledad. And again, it was another story of a very brave, courageous young woman. And I wanted to tell her story. And so Shafali and I reached out to Soledad together, and we explained what we wanted to do. And she thought about it, and she decided, yes, I want to share my story. I want to do this. So we made the film. And the clip you're about to watch is about 3.5 minutes. It's the beginning of the film, and you meet Shafali, the lawyer, and you meet Soledad herself. And you see a little bit of how I weave live action and animation to tell this story. So we'll take a look.
The first time I see you, you're wearing a puffy orange coat with orange Crocs on your feet, sheathed in white socks. It's only on a subsequent visit, when I ask you hard questions, that you tell me you wear socks because the cold temperatures inside the facility hurt your toes where your toenails were ripped out with pliers by the men who kidnapped you. When we enter the tiny meeting room, 3 feet by 5 feet at most, I feel trapped even though I've never been claustrophobic before. You do too because, as I find out later, you were tortured in a room very much like this one. It was called the killing room because it was always covered in blood.
Me crié en un pueblo. Mi niñez era una vida normal, pero feliz con mi familia. Mi mamá trabajaba en una tabacalera. Siempre fue una mujer muy trabajadora, la quiero mucho y siempre le ha echado ganas para sacar adelante a sus hijos. Ella siempre me decía que yo iba a salir adelante, que iba a ser una gran persona. Siempre recuerdo esas palabras cuando me decía que yo era muy buena hija. En el lugar donde vivíamos nunca me había pasado a mí hasta un cierto tiempo cuando yo crecí. Empezaron a verme ellos y cuando uno va creciendo quieren ponerlo a vender drogas y si tú no vendes drogas, entonces la agarran contigo y empiezan a querer hacerle daño a uno si uno no hace las cosas.
She was gang raped when she was 14 by members of a gang, and she, with her mother, attempted to report this to the police. What we think, based on the facts we know, is that somehow the police and the gangs communicated and this became known. Subsequently, the gang threatened her life and her family, the lives of her family members, and kidnapped her and held her in a different place. They took her away from her hometown to a city and held her along with other girls in these sex trafficking rings.
Mi error fue haber ido a la policía y ellos, tal vez si yo no hubiera ido a la policía, tal vez no me hubiera pasado las cosas que me pasaron, no hubiera tenido que huir, porque cuando ellos se dieron cuenta de lo que yo hice, ellos me hicieron mucho daño a mí.
When the gang kidnapped her and forced her into sex slavery, she was told that if you ever say anything about this to your family, we will kill them.
Wow, very powerful, Lisa. I know you tend to work on immigration films in general. Your new film is also about immigration. I'm really curious, and we'll go with another question right after this, but some of the challenges that you face, because a lot of this maybe happened in the past and you didn't have access to the footage. And so challenges you faced, and then how you decided to incorporate animation into the film.
Yeah, I can answer both of those questions in the same answer. Well, one of the challenges is filming or not filming in a detention center. So a lot of the story takes place at Eloy Detention Center in Arizona. And one cannot enter the detention center with a camera. I have been to Eloy. I've spent many hours at Eloy. You can bring a piece of paper and a pen and a jacket because it's really, really cold in there. But that's about it. You can't even bring your phone in. So I was never going to be able to film inside the detention center. But when I started to think about that, I wasn't really sure about how I would even try to represent it. Even if I did have a camera, it's basically white walls, no windows. And me going in for 3 or 4 hours is not the same as someone being there for months, if not a year or more. So what I started to think about was animation and how that could visually tell the story of Eloy but in a more psychological way. So the way in which I use the animation is not the literal, this is not literally the way it looks, but it's more how it feels. And so the animation that takes place inside of Eloy has these like sort of almost horror-like, very vibrant colors. It's called reverse color. And so inside the detention center, I use that color palette, but then when we get outside, she actually is released on bail. So she's able to leave the detention center, and then the colors are more muted and more real, and white is actually white. And so I really, you know, sometimes with filmmaking, you always have limitations and you always have obstacles, and it's really interesting to sort of take that obstacle and turn it around into something that's more creative and positive. So that was one thing, you know, that I dealt with. I mean, of course, another thing is that here's a woman who is now in the US, but her family is still in her country of origin, and she has siblings that, you know, also could be persecuted by these gangs if they learn that she is telling her story. And so, you know, we've been very careful not to or balance it where we can see her, we can see she's a lovely young woman and get to know her and see her face, but at the same time, not put her family in jeopardy. And so this was something I was very concerned about when we first started filming, of course. And since then, luckily, her two siblings have come to the US to claim asylum as well. So they are safe here in this country. So this is not something I've ever dealt with before. I have dealt with other immigration issues, but I've never dealt exactly with this one before, where, you know, someone could be killed because of a film that I made. So this is just something I continue to think about a lot.
Powerful. And,
well, thank you.
Wow, very powerful. And I want to say that if anyone wants to stay a little later and ask Lisa questions later, please, you know, you can hang for a little while longer. I want to introduce our next filmmaker. Very powerful film to say. These are awesome, amazing films. Okay, our next filmmaker is Jon. Our next film is Alternative Facts: The Lies of Executive Order 9066, directed by Jon Osaki. Jon's an award-winning filmmaker who has directed and produced promotional, educational, narrative, and documentary films. Jon used filmmaking as an opportunity, as I think many of us do, to amplify his lifelong pursuit of social justice and equity. So Jon, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks you all for joining us here today. And I wanted to share a little bit about my film. It is about the really the little known story about the politics and the false information that led to the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans in the United States. And a little bit about myself. I'm a third generation Japanese American. My father was incarcerated at the Tule Lake Segregation Center. My mother was incarcerated at the Gila River concentration camp. And I was actually with them. Some of you may know that in 1988, the US government issued a formal apology for the incarceration of Japanese Americans. I was actually with them the day they received their apology from the federal government. And I think for them, it gave them a small measure of closure of this horrific chapter in their lives. And I think it did for me to a certain degree. But that all changed in 2016. You know, for many years, I thought that the United States had acknowledged the horrible mistake it made, that people in this country understood how wrong it was. But in 2016, some of you may recall that political pundits and public officials started to come forward and not only suggest that the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II was justified, but that it could serve as precedent for policies that might have to be put in place targeting Syrian refugees and Muslim Americans. And, you know, growing up, I had always thought that over time, people would start to forget, but I never imagined that the unjust incarceration of my father, my mother, all of my aunts and uncles and family members could one day be manipulated and weaponized to justify oppressing other groups of people. And it was at that point that I decided that I had to do something about it. And this film was me doing something about it. So if we could roll the clip.
Laura, I think we're not showing it on the screen.
So sorry. Let me fix that right now. Give me a thumbs up if it's working, please.
Although President Reagan acknowledged that the incarceration of Japanese Americans was a mistake, he stopped short of calling it what it really was, a scandal of epic proportions.
Government lawyers intentionally destroyed and altered and suppressed evidence regarding the loyalty of Japanese Americans. Government lawyers also presented to the court false evidence regarding the commission by Japanese Americans of acts of espionage, acts that the government knew to be false.
It was covered up, but during my few years doing research at the archives, I found the lost 10th copy of the DeWitt report.
The cases that legalized and legitimized the incarceration of these Americans was false. It was a fraud.
Today more than ever, America needs to know the truth. They need to know that not only were Japanese Americans rounded up and incarcerated based on completely false information, but the government knew it, and these facts were deliberately covered up for decades.
It's time for this country to be reminded of the truth and that facts matter. They should have mattered in 1942, and they should matter today.
Thank you so much, Jon. I, of course, have many questions after seeing that amazing clip and hearing your story. But first, I want to just not take someone else's question first. So is there anyone that has a question for Jon before I would ask a question? I want to open it up. Well, while people are thinking, my first question I had that was really thinking about, Jon, is this whole context of what happened in history in the past with the incarceration of Japanese Americans. How do you think that is relevant today? Like, there's still a lot going on, we know, and things have gotten pretty challenging. So bring us into here and now and the relevance that you see.
Sure. So I think that one thing that became very apparent to me when I was working on this film is that, you know, the incarceration of Japanese Americans is really a story about being the unwanted immigrant in this country. And that during that time, there were many people in this country who did not want Japanese in the United States. There was a lot of competition, economic competition, because of the success of Japanese farmers. And so, unfortunately, the bombing of Pearl Harbor is blamed for the mass roundup and incarceration of an entire racial group. But really, this was in the works for decades before this ever happened. And really, Pearl Harbor was really just the opportunity that made it possible for that to happen. And I think it's not a far stretch to see how there are groups today who are now the unwanted immigrant in this country, who are the groups who are being targeted and scapegoated and made the, singled out for political agendas. And that really is very sadly what the incarceration of Japanese Americans was about. And I just think it is, very tragic that in so many ways we are repeating history right now in this country, that we have not learned from what took place during World War II. And so that was in part the reason for me making this film, was to make sure that educators could use the lessons from this dark chapter in American history to make sure that young people understood what really happened, and to really try to change hearts and minds about what it means when this country targets a group of people.
I have another question for you that came through the chat from Ellen. Jon, I'm sharing deep gratitude that you made this film. I'm curious at what kinds of things did not fit into the film that you struggled with, but in the end you had to leave out.
Well, so I've been telling people, so this film is very different. So there's been lots of films made about the incarceration of Japanese Americans. This film is the only one to address this subject matter. So there was a lot of, I guess I would call them sort of basic information about what happened and about the camps and about the experiences of people who were in the camps that did not fit into this film. And I know that's what a lot of people are used to with films about the incarceration. And so, but this was really focused on what was happening outside of the camps and all the influences that led to an entire racial group being incarcerated and sent away.
I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately, but hopefully we can do some more afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will hang out for additional questions. So our next film is Code Switching, Race and Identity in the Suburban Schoolhouse, produced by Mike Mascoll. And Mike is a director, producer, creative director, and founder of LEV Media Group. And his first film in New Day Films is On the Line, that highlighted one of the longest voluntary school desegregation programs in the country and its historical impact on the city of Boston. And this one is Code Switching. And Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to present some of my projects here. Full disclosure, I am also a member of this program called MECO, Metropolitan Education Through Opportunity. So I have a very close bond to the storyline, and that's where my passion starts. For the sake of definition, the practice, when I say code switching, I'm referring to the practice of alternating basically between two or more languages or cultures and behavioral experiences. For me, this film, it's a sequel to the first film, On the Line, but it's a little more personalized because we get a little bit deeper into the storylines of African American students who participated in the program, and you get a better understanding of some of the challenges that they had, as opposed to just giving a high-level overview of the program and its success. We take a stronger look at how the program itself impacted students who were bused from the inner city schools to the suburban community. Some of the long-term effects that are involved when they went through the act of code switching itself, trying to fit in two different worlds, but also feeling alienated in the same two different worlds that they're trying to fit in. So this film, it's a mashup. It's a mashup of personal stories, but generational stories. So we look at the experiences from students from a few decades back into the current state of students today, and some of the challenges that they're faced with social media and the additional pressures that they have to go through in their day-to-day. Employing the documentary, we used theatrical footage. We used a lot of animation to try to attract the next generation and the younger audience. Original music. And this film, in addition to being distributed through New Day, it's about a couple of weeks away from being launched on PBS through Neta. to be distributed across the country and broadcast most likely in the December, January timeframe. But with that said, why don't we just go ahead and take a look at the clip and go from there.
Ever since that first bus ride, I started asking myself, why do I have to go so far away in order to get a high quality education? Like, why? I don't understand.
We are a group of minority students going to these white suburban towns, hoping for a better education.
And you leave people with a needle in their arm at 5 o'clock in the morning, ride the rest of the way the bus out to Lexington, and you're in school with a bunch of white kids and white teachers.
You would go from the inner city to an affluent school system.
The whole experience gave me one vital thing: how to deal with other people that were different from you.
People have all these stereotypes about us. Like, when they'll start a beat, expect you to rap, but that just wasn't me.
There was a point where it was like having two Fatimas. I feel like a weird disconnect, like I don't fit in either spots.
When I'm out in Weston, I try to make sure that I speak as well as I can because I don't want to be that black.
My parents made it very clear there's probably no reason that I should be in Lexington unless I'm in school or I'm making up a test, meeting with a teacher or sports.
You know, just be careful where you are. Be careful what you do, because you know if something happens, they're coming to get you.
Whatever the majority image is, that's what the standard is.
Yeah.
And so everyone look pale-skinned, blonde hair. I am not that.
When I wear my natural hair out, I feel like I get less likes than when I do when, like, if my hair were to be straightened. I felt very vulnerable and exposed. My depression was most severe between my 8th grade and 10th grade years. Throughout that period of time, I tried to attempt suicide 12 times. I've seen one black substitute in my school for the 4 years that I've been going there. We don't have enough resources to help us when we are struggling through school. Also, I think that they're using us just to have that little spark of diversity. I'm one of 6% in my school.
I felt like the only time I existed in the classroom was in February and when we decided to learn about the Civil War and slavery. You mean to tell me that's the only time I exist?
It was like we lived two lifestyles.
You lived two different
You know, you lived your home, hood, black, whatever you want to call it, you know, your city life and dealing with you and me and everybody like us. And then you get on a bus, drive 20 miles, and bang, it's a whole nother world.
It's taken me so long to realize that I'm just one person. If I don't know like all the street language or I don't like portray myself as like the stereotypical black girl in school or at home, they don't like me because I'm not like them. It's just like, hey, throw the deuces up.
Thank you so much, Mike. What an awesome looking film. And while people are thinking of a question, I just wanted to quickly ask you, you know, just mainly what your main goal is with the film, your outcome when you were making the film. It's going to be on NIDA with PBS. What's your hope when it goes to a broader audience?
Well, you know, first of all, yeah, the first goal was just to have more reach and take this local story and make it a national story, because there's some similarities obviously in different markets across the country. I think there are 14 programs like this across the country that may not have survived the 50 years that MECO did, but they made an attempt to follow the same model. The real purpose behind the film is just to recognize and teach that broader audience some of the pros and cons of code switching and the outcomes that come from it, right? So the pros of code switching are the simple fact that you can actually build bridges and build communities in that manner, as long as those that are code switching make an effort to actually be involved and be part of their communities. The cons, of course, are those that make that attempt but still remain to feel isolated, and all sorts of subsequential issues come about. So the first goal was just to kind of broaden the audience and use that terminology, code switching, as a positive, to be okay with your authentic self, to recognize and accept differences. You know, the best way to avoid isolation is to actually get involved in your community, get involved in ways that kind of take you outside of your comfort zone.
Very nice. And how do you see the film being used in the classroom in education?
Well, I mean, for teachers and educators across, I think it's a great way to kind of break down barriers, especially if you have a diverse uh, teaching environment where maybe you're not getting through to some students and you're getting through to others. It's a great way to kind of break down barriers and allow them to recognize that, there are differences in our environment, but there's also the opportunity to kind of share and cross-reference your cultures. Um, the idea behind my whole business model, LEV, stands for Lift Every Voice. It's to give a voice to marginalized voices, and in this case, more often than not, it was female students from the program that seemed to be left behind. So I wanted to make sure that I put some emphasis on hearing their stories this go around.
A question that just came in, it says, congrats on the PBS broadcast. Cheers. What types of classes have already used your film so far? And saying that this person imagines that it straddles quite a few different disciplines.
Well, sure. In the K through 12 environment, I've presented it to about 10 different communities there's about 40 communities in Massachusetts that participate in this receivership program. So I got about a fourth of them on board where they've used it in the classroom structure and used it as a way to start the school year off and introduce to their student population that this is a year where we're going to be a little more constructive around the idea of diversity and inclusion in our environment. So a lot of them have used it and have been impactful in that way. At the collegiate level, a little bit different. Obviously, you got a much larger audience. There are some specialty classes, ethnic classes and such. But I think I still need to put a little more effort in making sure that it gets stronger reach, because it doesn't do any good to just present it to one cultural audience. The idea is to kind of bring in audiences from all different levels.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a powerful message about diversity and inclusion. I want to go to our next, just to keep our time going, and moving on to our next filmmaker. Our final film today is called Undeterred, and it is directed by Michael Rowley. And Michael's a documentary filmmaker from Dallas, Texas, who aims to document unrepresented stories in an effort to bring awareness and equity and justice to interconnect and to interconnect the global society. So you have the floor.
Hey, Laura, thank you all for being here. My film is Hurdle. Actually, I think Undeterred is a different one, but my name is Michael Rowley. I'm the director of Hurdle, and Hurdle is a documentary feature film that follows two Palestinians living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as they navigate political and personal obstacles in an unexpected way. They use the sport of parkour and the art of photography. And really, it's an up close and very personal look at one of the most talked about regions in the world, and provides a new perspective through the eyes of the next generation of Palestinian leaders. And ultimately, the film asks the question, how can one practice to perfect their freedom? I'm very grateful that the film has shown at over 19 film festivals around the world. We've won 4 jury prizes, including for Best Documentary Feature Film. And we've been featured in publications like the New York Times. And recently, we were selected. I would note to the New Day audience that we have a study guide available for our film for educators and community groups. And really, it's designed to help answer some questions, but spur productive conversation and discussions after watching the film, because that's really the goal of myself and the rest of the producing team with Hurdle. I don't want to talk too much because I'd rather hear your questions and answer them specifically. So we're going to take a look at the trailer and then answer some questions.
lots of stories to tell about us as a human.
أنا أصور بعدين بتنزلوا بلشوا تطيروا.
بس بنلعب باركور اللي بتحسسنا بالشعور اللي كل الشعب مفتقده، اللي هو الحرية.
طريقة اللي مصورينها هان اللي هو يعني واقف بالضبط هان هي تحت راح يطلع كبير حتى ممكن يطلع أعلى من الجدار.
إذا هذا الإنسان لقى حلمه ولقى هدفه، كتير حياته راح تختلف كتير.
يرفع فوق. مش قادر. هذا التردد بدمرك تحت رجلك.
Thank you so much, Michael. Of course, I know your film really well because it showed at Mountain Film, where I work as the festival director. I absolutely love the film and can't wait for some questions. But my first question for you, just to get things kicked off, is this is a really different look at the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and especially using parkour of all things and photography. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you came upon that story and why you decided to approach it that way.
Yeah, sure. Why I kind of jumped into the story is a little bit of a long story, but I came from a small conservative community that really, I was raised only hearing the other side of the story and thinking that you had to support Israel in every single policy that it put forth. And as I kind of grew up and deconstructed this, I saw the other side of the story, the cause and effect of some of these policies. And really the film is a letter to my younger self saying, hey, look at these young men and the tools that they're using, these modern day tools to kind of practice and perfect their own freedom. And really I was working in the region, working for NGOs, and I came across this parkour team, and they were using the very walls that were built to keep them static as a launch pad for their own freedom of movement. And I just thought, what a beautiful metaphor this is, to kind of take these walls and turn them on its head. And so the goal of our film and our approach to the film was really to just let audiences walk in the shoes of these characters, rather than telling you what you should think or just being all about information about this conflict. We want the audience to experience it with our characters. So it's very much a verite film where you see the action through the eyes of our characters who are on screen the entire time. So really, I want people to walk away knowing what it feels like to be in these shoes. And then maybe, hopefully, we can work towards a more just and equitable future for everyone there in the region.
Wonderful. Super personal film. Absolutely love it. Here's a question that I just got, just came in. Thank you for making this powerful film. What were some of the greatest challenges during production?
Oh man, there obviously, whenever you make a film in another country, that kind of comes with some challenges. But you know, I would say funding was very much like a grassroots effort, but also, you know, it was very important, me being an outsider coming in, to establish and build a giant amount of trust with my characters. And I'm so grateful that they allow us into very personal spaces with them. By the end of production, I was with them and their families and pretty much every waking moment. And so I would say, you know, going into a conflict zone, navigating the dangers that are kind of inherent in those environments, but also just getting to a place where we respected and knew one another well enough that we could really walk away with something that's unique that people haven't seen before coming out of this region.
Here's another question for you, Michael, from Jonathan. He's curious about how you involved your characters during distribution, and did you compensate them for being part of the film?
Yeah, as many times as I can, I often get them on Q&As with me, and you know, they've woken up in the wee hours of their morning in order to talk with, you know, even college students here in the States after we do like an online school. So as much as I can, I try to uplift and put their voices into the forefront. Due to travel restrictions, unfortunately, you know, at the festivals, we were not able to secure visas for them, though we tried. But as often as we can, we point people towards them in ways that they can support, but also hear from them and outside of the film, and to really get involved in their lives as much as they would like people to. And in terms of financial support, we didn't obviously pay them during the production, because that's an ethical line that we had to navigate, and decided that it was best that we do not do that. But through some of our crowdfunding, portions of all of our crowdfunding, which is a major way that we you know, funded the film, to the parkour team, and then also to the place that Mohammed works in, a refugee camp in the West Bank.
Great. Here's a question. You all let me know, timekeepers, if we have time. What perspective, this is from Louise, what perspective did you gain, if any, about the Israelis while working there?
Yeah, I mean, I learned so much. Obviously, there were Israelis who worked on this film as well. You know, there's a broad, similar to in the US, there's a broad spectrum of political and ideological and religious beliefs. So Israel and Palestine is a very small place. So you have all of these different people and different beliefs and experiences and histories jam-packed into this small place. And unfortunately, it's kind of led to violence and unrest in the past. But at the same time, there's just so much beauty, and there's so many similarities between the cultures. And I just, it's hard to put into words what I learned from them, but you know, I learned about their own experience, their own connection to the land, why they feel it's important for them to be there, and their hope, similar hope, for an equitable and free future for everyone there.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for this poignant, powerful, timely film, Hurdle. And lastly, I want to now introduce Annie Small. And she's going to tell you guys a little bit briefly about our collections licensing opportunities and other new day offerings.
Well, hi. Thank you so much to the filmmakers who shared their really powerful and beautiful films with us today. I can't wait to dive in and watch them all. What a treat to hear from you today of all days. So that was wonderful. I now have the pleasure of sharing with you all, after we've heard from these great filmmakers about their films, sharing with you all some of the new offerings that New Day has as of this season. So as you and your institution, you and your organization are thinking about adding films to your video library or utilizing films in the classroom, these are some new offerings that we'd love for you guys to take into consideration. Due to demand during COVID, during work from home, school from home, we've now opened the option for institution email access for streaming. So that's an exciting new offering that we have. So basically you and your organization, let's say anyone with an email address that's, at columbia.edu or whatever organization that you have, anyone with that institution email, you have the option now to utilize that for your streaming. 3 other things to note for streaming is that we offer both a 1 or 3 year license for individual films that you can find on each individual film's webpage. We also do offer a 14-day streaming license for individual films, which is a great offer for last minute types of programming for your classroom. And then finally, something that's exciting, we call life of file license. So similar to how maybe your organization would have purchased a DVD or a VHS for a film, you know, your library has that DVD in perpetuity, right? So we now offer this kind of exciting new product called Life of File License, which is essentially in perpetuity streaming license for a film. So that's something to make sure. And by the way, we have a brochure, a one sheet with all of this information that we'll email to our viewers today after this Zoom. And then another interesting and exciting offer that that we have now is called collection licensing. And there's two different types of collections that we're offering. The first is called a full collection license, which is 1 or 3 year licenses. That's basically access to New Day's entire streaming catalog. So if you have questions about what that could look like, pricing on this brochure, on this one sheet that we'll send you after the Zoom today, you can reach out to our team and we can discuss those sort of pricing offerings for the entire streaming catalog. And that's called our full collection. The second collection option that we have is called customized collection license, which essentially is the same thing, 1 or 3 year licenses for streaming, but it's for is exactly what it sounds like, a customized sort of curated collection. So anything from 2 films to 10 films to 40 films. Let's say your institution would like a collection of 15 LGBTQ titles. Talk with us. We now offer different pricing opportunities for a customized collection that can work for your institution. And then finally, just some points of note to always take into consideration that we're excited to share is that all of our streaming titles are closed captioned and a growing number of films have audio description. Also, many titles, as I believe it was Michael who pointed out for his film, many titles have discussion guides and other supplementary materials. So on our individual films pages, let's say you go to CODESWITCHING's page, for example, or you go to Hurdle, for example, if the filmmaker may or may not have an option for you to get a discussion guide or other supplementary materials. And then finally is that our filmmakers are available. We have 100+ filmmakers in our organization, in our co-op, and we are available for Zoom or Skype sessions. So you want to do a film discussion with your classroom, invite the filmmaker to join in on that discussion. And I think that's it in terms of New Day offerings for this season.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Annie. Thank you all. Amazing films, great questions. Thank you guys for asking questions. Stay tuned for our newsletters, our newsletters, and also November 19th, mark your calendars, November 19th, 2 p.m. Eastern time is our
17th.
November, thank you, Reagan. Thank you. Now you'll really remember it. Tuesday, November 17th. And Reagan's putting it, I think Reagan already put it in the chat for you to RSVP, and 5 more filmmakers you get to meet. And thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for coming. We look forward to seeing you next time. If anyone would like to stay for a few minutes, just to ask any questions or just to say hello, you're welcome to. So we can stop recording now, right? I'll stop recording.